Starting with your comrade David.
Is that all right?
Yes.
All right, and let me just add something to what Olabisi said to Martin Franklin's question about where does the leadership come from. I think that at one level, leadership of not just the political parties, but institutions, whether of civil society, whether it be trade unions or business or the religious groups and so on, have to say, sorry? Or the university, yes, very importantly the university, have to say we need change and we are committed to it. Now the form and mechanism, which was what the debate there between the two learned gentlemen from the academy was about, the form and mechanisms in terms of the detail of the change, that has to be led by the independent process for it to have the legitimacy. Yes? So it is not perceived to be led by one or more of the interest groups that is now trying to defend its position with respect to the change. Now, and let me just, and I'm going to answer this question too, don't worry. But we talked about that in the CIF, because, and the MSJ has mirrored that position in our policy document. A secretariat, rather than a commission of so-called wise men and women who would then put forward their positions. But a secretariat first to educate, because Bishnu and Roger are absolutely correct. People don't know, to educate. And you have to educate it this way. Not only explain what the Constitution says, but the Constitution tries to establish, say, an executive, a legislature, a judiciary, just take three things. But there are different options to get a legislature, there are different options to get an executive, there are different options to get a judiciary and so on. So you have to lay out all those different options so that people could see the different options, so that when there is now consultation, people can say, I prefer this option, but you can't say you prefer it because the party tells you to say that. You prefer it for X, Y, Z reason on some basis of understanding and information. And it's very interesting that in Venezuela, we want to criticize Chavez and so on, some people want to. In Venezuela, ordinary people would take out their constitution and refer to Article 1543 and say what is in it and what their rights are and so on, in a way that Trinidad and Tobago citizens can do it. So we need that kind of thoroughgoing process. Now, the issue of, is it possible to bring about fundamental change? I believe it is. Otherwise, 40-something years of my life from a student leader in 1970, whatever, to now would be a waste. And Olabisi from being an activist in 1970 and so on and others would be a waste. So I think we believe it is possible for it to happen, but it doesn't happen necessarily because you want it to happen. There are processes that are underway and so on, and what you have to do is to move the ball as far down the field as you can and make the interventions as much as you can to bring about the change. I think we are getting to the point where there is a much greater awakening of people's understanding of their powerlessness in some sense, and the need for people to have more power, to be a check and balance on the power of the executive. And if the moderator allows me about Prakash Ramadan, for 1 second, Prakash Ramadan was put in charge of constitutional reform the night when the long knives came out for him in 2012, right? Because there was a rumor that he was going to be removed because he had made a statement over the Marlene Kudry affair that he was no longer going to be held by the government whip on voting in the parliament. And the rumor was that he was going to be removed, and there was a cabinet meeting that went on for hours. And I was still a member of the Senate. We, MSG, had raised issues of concern, and the non-cabinet parliamentarians were not allowed to enter the cabinet room until 11 o'clock at night, and then we were asked for comments. And I refused to comment, and the Prime Minister and I had it out openly in front of everybody. The guy said, it's 11:30 in the night, Prime Minister, with respect. After everybody's been, some of us have been sitting down doing nothing for 6 hours. You have been in meetings for 6 hours. We cannot have a serious discussion about people's concerns at this point in time. We're too tired and time doesn't permit and so on. But when we got into the room, it was now being agreed by the cabinet that Prakash would now take the lead on constitutional reform and not the Attorney General, who had been given the lead rather than the office of the Prime Minister where it first started. And Olabisi would remember we met with Colin Parta, who was given the lead initially on Constitution Reform. So, and that was clearly a maneuver to tie Prakash up like a Sunday morning crab. And he fell totally for it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening. Atkins Vidal, MSG. I just wanted to perhaps make a comment and then ask a question. When Ozzy talks about and the other panelists about where do we go from here and what is missing and if it is possible, I think a key part of it is the absence of consciousness among young people. And this institution, unfortunately, plays a big role in the wrong way. I'm a graduate here as well, so I can say that openly because I'm speaking from experience. When David was here, back in the 70s, you had 1 year, so you do exams at the end of the year. Students make noise on campus, take part in 1970, they introduce a semester system. So then you have to do exams at the end of each semester so that you can't play the fool and get involved in protest action and what's happening nationally and so on. When I was here, we started to make some noise, and then what happened is that before you could stay on hold for 3 years, and then they decided you could only stay on hold for 1 year if you were Trinidadian national. And that happened at Milner, because we were using the halls as part of the mobilizing mechanism when we had issues and so on. So one of the things that we have to acknowledge are the counter positions of those who like the status quo. And I think we have to acknowledge that and start to identify those pockets where persons coalesce around keeping the status quo in the same way that we're now discussing trying to change it. So there are two real positions which exist. Take for example, this forum this evening. The student population here should mean that this place should be filled. And it isn't. A few weeks ago, as heightened as the conversation was nationally about the Constitution Amendment Bill, you were not seeing young people in the respective forums. But I have pictures, and we can see the pictures on Facebook of Caesar's Army Juve Fete, and it's thousands and thousands of young people there. Not hundreds, literally thousands of young people fetting while the rest of the country discussing constitutional reform. Right.
So my question, before you ask your question, and I am taking it back to what the lady from the OWTU said, because she was talking about the social and economic conditions of the time, which made, quote-unquote, revolution possible. Back to Ozzy's question. Now, the circumstances are very different. You have a huge middle class, you have people with excess cash in their pocket, students driving big cars and so on. How do you bring about that kind of change in the society?
I think it's several things. One, we have allowed a reorganizing of our history in our minds. So you spoke about us having a revolutionary history. If you ask the average student now, they'll tell you that we're very passive and so on, and you ask them about 30s and 70s, and that doesn't matter. The other thing with the 30s and 70s, which the comrade was absolutely correct about, is that our financial situation as a country was very different. And if you look at the reports of the 1930s and late 1960s, they're both post-depressions and they're both periods where the economy is contracting, and so that people are feeling it directly in their pockets. The reality may be today that we just have too much money for a revolution to take place. We just have too much money because the Prime Minister or whoever, the Minister of Finance, can then read that if you have children next year, you get $500, and then, okay, your problem solved, so you don't need to get vexed about anything again.
Okay, so the question you wanted to ask.
The question I wanted to ask really is that while all that is happening, I am not losing the point that we seem to have the population, not all, but I think a critical mass with their ears up at this point, because there are dialogues happening all over the place, whether it's in the taxi, where people are having lunch, in the barber shops. So you have a discussion going on. So my question really is to the panel, how do we move that discussion into action at this point in time? That's really my question. How do we move this discussion? As
Olabisi, you want to
small as it
respond to
is?
that?
Hard question. Well, I don't know if I have anything very revolutionary to see in terms of how do we do it. I mean, I could talk in the somewhat abstract that you just have to keep going and trying to get to the minds of people. Two things I want to see. A colleague of mine was saying in response to similar question like that, is that we have to try to get to people in their communities who are expressing concerns about their particular situation and making, are complaining about particular situations. And that is going on. It may not be going on around reforming the Constitution, but people are making noise, in various ways. And therefore, one of the things probably is to get at those groups, probably small, those groups in the various locations, to see if there could be a coming together of those groups, and for those groups to see a commonality among all the things. The specifics might be different, but there may be a commonality, and we might find that there is a feeling, maybe very deep still, to want to take charge of your situation. And if you are able to get people to recognize that that is what they are saying about their condition, then we would have made a first step in terms of moving towards constitution.
Let me provoke my good friend Bishnu. Is the role along the same line of engendering change? Is the role of the university lecturer a role of an academic, pure driven, without taking a position, without getting your students to, pushing your students to revolutionary action? What can the university do? A lot of people have talked about different forms of different forms that the university took 25, 30 years ago. Can you achieve that kind of thing?
Challenge that we have at this point in time is simply how do we as academics, in fact, and I think it has been said here, how do we as academics mobilize even the young people beyond the classroom? And I say that, take for instance, we in a panel such as this, I would have expected more students here. We're in the middle of the semester, or at least not, sorry, at the start of the semester. It's not like they don't have time. But so they could have been here, but the students are not here. 2 years ago, I took, in my department, we took the university on the road. And we started a series of what we call conversations with the society. Believe it or not, in every community that we went to, if we got 25 people, sorry, if we got 50 people, we were lucky. Okay? And we were dealing with current issues, day-to-day issues as they affected people, whether it was poverty, whether it was healthcare, and what we were doing in the academic sphere here, we were taking it out to the community and saying, well, look, let's share what we have. So it's not only for our students. And we were not getting the response there. So what is the role of the university then? And can the university do what it did in the 70s and the 90s? Well, we don't have a Louis Bob anymore. For those of you who know Louis Bob. But what we do, and in fact, I think this is part of our shortcoming to us as a university. Most of our lecturers now are into, and you raise the question nicely, or you put it nicely, because of the semester system, students are given no chance at all, literally, to do anything but study, exams. Study, exams. I mean, when I was a student too, I had the luxury of the 1 year period. You started in October, you write exams in May. Now, students start in September, they write exams in December. They start in January, they write exams in May or in April. They don't have time. So the student body there itself is not given that luxury to at least conceptualize, to understand what society. If you tell them, for instance, I told my class yesterday, you need to look at you need to read your constitution, and whichever country from the Caribbean, make sure you get a copy of your constitution. And one girl raised her hand and said, Dr. Ragoonath, but why? And she was not a Trinidadian, she said, well, why? I don't have to read my constitution from my country. I mean, it doesn't make a difference one way or the other.
Roger?
Yeah. Part of the kind of responding to my colleague here, and a bit of what Bishnu said, but I was just speaking. We cannot apply what obtained when we were students to today. I was it's that, but again, but that's 7 years later, almost 10 years later, sorry. So what has happened, there's a different environment, and I'm trying to apply this now will not work. We're dealing with a student body now who is using different media, different forms of communicating. And we need to understand that that is the mechanism through which you can reach to them. Don't expect that a room full of students will get here. We get students to come by threatening.
That's true.
Let's not fool ourselves here. When the room is full, it's because they know it is 4 marks. All right. Somewhere in there are few, but we use that as the means of bringing them here. But they leave a bit more energized and sensitized and motivated. So it's about getting them here. That's the means. But having done so, you energize them. They will now use the media that they know how to use through the social media. The important thing, therefore, is that we ensure that the information is correct. Because if the information is incorrect, we're going to be doing a hell of a lot more damage than we're doing now.
Okay. Just he's been waiting for some time. Sorry.
Pleasant good night. My name is Elanjus. Very interested to the panel I want to ask. I remember I was in town hall and a similar meeting like this was taking place. And a young student from university didn't even know about Belville Jones and Guy Harewood. And these was people who also was standing up for the rights and struggle for the way forward. Just what we're fighting today. I don't think from back then to now anything has changed. And we have a lost generation. I sure if I ask any one of the young students here, who is Maestro, a simple Calisoni, simple thing like that, who is Brigo, we really at a loss here because our history is really washed away, and the system, and more the system is getting to us. There's a dark cloud over. Now, Jennifer Jones and them was struggling. Today, you're talking about armored vehicle and you're talking about body bags and all these things. Is this troubling the community also that we can't stand up for our rights just now? That's all I have to say. Thanks.